This is episode 88 of Ethics and Culture Cast from Notre Dame's DeNicola Center for Ethics and Culture. Welcome to episode 88 of Ethics and Culture Cast from the DeNicola Center for Ethics and Culture at the University of Notre Dame. I'm Ken Hellenius, the communications specialist at the center. In this episode, we chat with Leah Libresco Sargeant, author of The Dignity of Dependence, a Feminist Manifesto, newly published in the DeNicola Center's Catholic Ideas for a Secular World book series, in collaboration with the University of Notre Dame Press. Let's sit down together for this fantastic conversation. Well, Leah Sargeant, thank you so much for coming to be with us here on the podcast.
It's my pleasure.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your background? Where are you from? Where and what did you study? Kind of those sorts of things.
I grew up in Long Island as an atheist in what I'd say is a fairly non-religious community. I went to Yale University where I studied political science, but I'll cop to the fact that I picked political science because I thought it was interesting and that I could write a thesis in it, but also that it would give me the most room to take whatever other classes I wanted. So I took a lot of math classes, a number of public health classes, and in my senior year, I took a seminar on Stephen Sondheim and one on musical theater songwriting. So I've been all around.
Well, and you make reference in your book multiple times to working on tech crew and in theater. So, I mean, I'm interested in that. What did you do there?
So mostly I auditioned and didn't get cast for things, I'll say, in college, which is how I wound up on tech and costume crew, though I valued them both because one thing that really gives you is a sense of sometimes it doesn't matter if you have a good excuse for not getting the work done. If you do not sew this skirt onto this bodice, the actress will be naked from the waist down, right? So
Sure.
This sense, which I think has stood me in good stead as a parent, as a writer, of just sometimes it doesn't matter if you have a good excuse. You have to find a way to get the work done.
Yeah. And there's an actual deadline, a curtain time.
And it's better to do it semi-badly than to not do it at all.
Yeah.
Because eventually the show is going to open. You can have an ugly seam, but you can't have no seam.
Is it Chesterton who says something about anything worth doing is worth doing badly?
Yes, he does.
Well, now, you're the mother of a family. So can you tell us a little bit about your family life?
Absolutely. I've been married, let's see, it'll be 9 years this fall. And we have 3 kids who are with us, and we have 6 kids who didn't make it to birth.
Okay. Wow. And how old are your kids?
5, 3, and 1.
So you've got a young family, and I know I've met a couple of them because you've been to the fall conference. You've been here on campus a couple times.
Yes, and you guys are really the standouts of all conferences I've attended for accommodating babies for speakers, which I love.
Well, it's one of the things we enjoy. Like at our tailgates, we have a huge parking lot of strollers right outside.
Amazing.
It's fun. Well, now, Leah, you write a substack called Other Feminisms. Now, for those of us who may not know a lot about what Substack is, can you tell me a little bit about that and then what Other Feminisms is about?
I think in many ways, Substack just steals from the best parts of blogging, but gives it a new spin so that it feels novel again. But when I was in college, all my friends used to make blogs for the summer so that we'd have a way of reading and thinking together in public while we weren't together over dinner or lunch to talk through ideas, which I loved. Blogging kind of fell off, and Substack brings back that spirit of blogging, of lively, thoughtful comment sections of people writing to and with each other. But it does it through posts that land in your inbox instead of just statically on a blog that you visit. I think it's been a real help. So in Other Feminisms, I'm writing about what it means to advocate for women as women in a world that often sees us as defective men. And one of my favorite things is that I'll write an essay and then I'll get really thoughtful, in-depth comments, and then I'll run a week or two later a roundup of the comments. So it really feels like it's a place where I can have a sustained conversation around a central idea. Versus as much as I like freelance writing, I'll write an essay. I hope it connects with readers, but I don't hear from them. They don't continue to have a conversation with me. This feels alive in a different way.
Yeah. I'm led to believe there's also, there's like a subscription portion. As you say, it's going to end up in my inbox too. So
That's right. So people opt in to get this on purpose from me, which is great. I'm not relying on kind of the vagaries or, sudden changes to an algorithm on Twitter or Facebook that will leave you signed up in theory, but not seeing it in practice.
Yeah.
And people can choose to sponsor the newsletter. So I operate, I say, on a PBS model, right? It's free, but it's made possible by readers like you who choose to subscribe and subsidize my time so that I can choose to say no to paid freelance work to say yes to this project.
Fantastic. Well, now, other feminisms, actually, ideas there percolate up and appear in your newest book, which is The Dignity of Dependence. And this is very much a book about relationship, I would say, in a very real sense, specifically the multi-layered relationships between individuals, the sexes, families, and society. So how did this book come about?
I think all my books really start when I'm having more and more conversations and more freelance pieces that are all circling a central theme. And I get to a point where I want to be able to give readers the chance to explore this idea in depth. I have enough thinking to sustain it. And it's a book I can picture someone not just reading privately, but kind of grabbing a friend by the shoulders and saying, I understand the world better now. And I want you to read this because I want this to be a big thought that we can both use to reorient our lives and reorient our relationship with each other. My book before this, Building the Benedict Option, was a book very like that, where I want people to put the book down when they're only partway through, because now that they've read this far in, they want to invite someone over for dinner right now without vacuuming first. And I think The Dignity of Dependence is hopefully a book very like that too, where before you finish the book, I hope that you're calling a friend, asking for help, spending time together, thinking about where you can meet the need in your community and where you want to reveal the real needs you have to each other.
Yeah. Well, it definitely, I set it down a couple times while reading it and went in and was chatting with my wife, who was, watching television, or I don't know actually what she was doing because I was reading and I was really engrossed in the book. I will say that. But I think one of the things that struck me is that in some ways it's an indictment of the kind of dominant American paradigm of this isolated, autonomous self, the person who does it all on his own or her own, lives the lie of the lonely individual, as your second chapter is entitled. Reminded me very much, of course, of the image of the Marlboro Man, the rugged individual creating his own life without another soul in sight. But you point out that this paradigm is particularly deficient when it comes to being a woman. So what are some of the challenges faced by women in a society where autonomy is prized above all else?
I think what's obvious is that women, by nature of our bodies, by our ability to sustain life in the womb, are not fully autonomous. People depend on us, and they depend on us in ways that change our lives and genuinely make us weaker, unable to do certain things because of this big yes to the life growing inside us. I really want to never minimize how much pregnancy asks of a woman. It's not honest to say, well, I'm just the same as a man while I'm pregnant, except I'm bigger, right? I might be feeling really sick. I might have to have a lot of appointments. For my most recent baby, I had to go on a medication to forestall early labor. That meant I needed 2 weeks leave from work because the medication was making me so sick while making my baby safe. And pregnancy is the most obvious way this happens, where someone else's need for us reshapes our body and therefore reshapes our life. But everyone has moments like this. Women just most obviously and in kind of the most outwardly visible way. But when your parents get old, when they're entering hospice, when their memory is declining, suddenly your life has to change shape. You have to say no to other things, to say yes to the person you love. And if you approach the world through this lens of autonomy is what it means to be human, then to a real extent, your children and your parents are messing up your life. They're taking away from you something you had a right to and that everyone else is enjoying. And I think that's obviously just descriptively untrue. It's not reasonable to say that a human life is an autonomous life when we see it's not autonomous at the beginning when you're a baby. It's not autonomous for women while you're pregnant. It's not autonomous for most parents while your kids are going through the, whirligig of respiratory infections and potty training and other needs. And then just when you feel like your kids are big enough that maybe you can live your own solid autonomous life, your parents get old, right? So we take this false image as the pattern for a whole life when it applies to very little of our lives. And it teaches us that most of the time our lives are going wrong. And most of the time our loves for other people are disordering our lives. And worst of all, that when you're the person in need, when you're the kid, when you're the elderly adult, when you're someone with a chronic disability, you're ruining someone else's life by your strange, unanticipated neediness. Versus what it means to be human is to be someone who cannot live on their own, definitely at the beginning of your life, for various other parts of it too. And the question is just, who will stand there to answer my need, and how will we love each other?
Yeah. And of course, we're seeing this play out in, discussion about death with dignity.
Yes.
Things like that. People don't want to be burdensome to their children. And so it gets sold as we're helping people, avoid pain. But it eventually works out as, well, the people themselves don't want to be a burden.
Exactly. And I think it's really important to note that when it comes to the states where we have granular survey data on that euthanasia program, more people cite that fear of being a burden than they do the experience of pain. And that's something that's learned, right? Pain is more objective, but we learn from each other that it's bad to need other people. We're anti-catechizing people about what it means to be human. And we're anti-catechizing them in a way that's so poorly calibrated to the reality of being a human that we're teaching people to kill themselves, right?
Yeah. And that's one of the interesting things about your book, I think, is that it actually has application not just to women, but to everyone, right?
Yes.
To the elderly, to men. You talk about, actually you have some fascinating chapter titles, by the way, that I love. One of them is Helping Women Be Better Men. Mm-hmm. The Lie of the Lonely Individual, as I just mentioned. But your first chapter, The World is the Wrong Shape for Women, in which you're showing how medicine is calibrated for male bodies. Countertops in kitchens are calibrated at a standard height, which may be too tall for the average woman. Things like this. I think you really draw some very relatable examples in your book, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, I framed the book as a feminist manifesto because the way I think about it, the lie of autonomy is one that women cannot tell. Right. It's false. And for women, it's obvious it's false much earlier in our lives. But if you live a relatively strong and healthy life as a man, if your parents are, young enough that the need isn't obvious, if you're not, plagued by some kind of disease or injury, you might be able to live within the lie comfortably for a while, not indefinitely. And of course, the more people you love, the harder it will be to believe the lie because you'll be touched by their need, even if you're strong in your body yourself. So my focus really is starting on that example of what's particular to women, particularly in pregnancy and fertility, that makes it obvious this can't be a true account of the human person, and then broaden that scope out to say, for folks who might feel more like maybe they can contort themselves to fit, what does it ask of them and what does it cost them? And I think a society that's ashamed of need has a less compelling story to tell about being a man also. Because if I talk about kind of the paradigmatic experience of a relationship to need for women is answering the need of a baby in pregnancy and afterwards nursing, etc. For men, it's not that the parallel is just, what people don't need men, they're just extra. It's that when a woman is made weaker by virtue of pregnancy, it's the man who is, because he is not directly affected, able to extend his strength willingly. When I'm pregnant, my baby needs things of me, and I don't even have to say yes. The baby just says, I need more blood, and my body says yes before I could will a yes myself. And then that can leave me weaker and needed to say no to other things. For my husband, it's always an active yes to my need. He isn't able to succor the baby directly in the way I can, but he can make choices about how he extends his strength over others. Now, if we think that weakness is kind of bad or humiliating, something we want to not show to others unless we're forced to, then men kind of wind up with this excess strength they long to give to extend over other people in love, but unsure how to do it or unsure if they're in some sense humiliating others by helping them.
Yeah. Wow. Well, now you propose, echoing Alistair McIntyre and Carter Snead, a recovery of the recognition that we are actually all embedded in wide, sometimes unchosen, networks of dependency on and responsibility for and to others. So if we even can, how do we change this dominant paradigm of autonomy that is so embedded in our culture?
I think the first step is just asking for help more often. My big hope is that everyone who reads this book asks for help with something they don't have to ask for help for within a week after reading it. And it can be a small ask, right? But I think to get other people to believe that need is not disgusting, it's actually more important for you to start asking for help more often than just to offer. Offering puts you in that stronger, magnanimous position where the other person isn't sure if they can say yes without you, in some sense, looking down on them. Choosing to place yourself in the position of asking for help means that you have now taught your friend that you don't think it's wrong to ask for help, especially asking for help in a way that's not guaranteed to be reciprocated. And I think that does help build up your local fabric of, need and receiving. And there's a lot of ways this can happen. I think one question is when you are too sick or too tired to cook for yourself, like, are there times it makes sense to ask a friend to help you out rather than ordering in food, which I think is something people have really backed off from, right? Because since everyone knows you can pay someone money to bring you food, it's kind of a lot extra to ask a friend to do it for you. It's gratuitous in some extent. And I think it's worth doing. I'll be traveling a lot this fall for my book. And one thing my husband will do proactively is he's going to ask some of our friends to invite our family over when I'm traveling a lot. When he's solo with the kids for 2 or 3 days at a time, he'll say, Leah's gone this weekend. Would you have us over for dinner at your house? And sometimes we're going to reciprocate, but sometimes we're not. He's going to ask because he thinks our friends love us and they want to help us in a time that's more chaotic for us.
Yeah. Boy, that's really funny because I invited myself over to somebody's house for dinner recently, and you wouldn't believe the razzing I got from the group, and yet everybody was like, that sounds like a lot of fun, kind of deal.
And once you do it, it is easier. We've had friends sometimes go like, you know what? One of our parents is out of the house. Like, can we come over to your place? And I'll sometimes say like, you can, but because we are busy, we'll have you over for pizza on paper plates. Does that work for you? And you know what? I've never had someone say no to that. Because when people are asking for this, they're not saying the most important thing for me is to be hosted beautifully. If you have the capacity for that, wonderful. They just want to be with someone in what's a stressful period.
Yeah. It's building a local community and strengthening these relationships that we're, as we say, embedded in already.
Exactly.
Well, now, it's no surprise, given what you explained about your own educational background, that you are particularly interested in policies and laws surrounding, in this case, you speak in your book about caregiving and labor laws and the effects that those have on these same questions. Now, you are very active on social media. I see you on Twitter all the time, often commenting about pro-family policies that can help correct some of these situations that we find ourselves in as a society. So what are some ways that the average person who maybe isn't a political science major, some ways that an average person can help bring about improvement and change?
One near-term, more achievable thing I'd love to see happen is a baby bonus for new parents. And this is something that's just meant to be a certain amount of money paid out right after birth. I've proposed $2,000 in a paper for the Niskanen Center, where the idea is people need some spaciousness after the birth of a child. And this kind of payment gives parents room to make one more right decision, whether this is covering the cost of the crib and the car seat, and some of that. It's covering the cost of taking time off work that you might not have, whether because your work doesn't offer paid leave, just unpaid leave, whether because you're a stay-at-home parent already, but now you need help for covering the needs of your older kids so that you can focus on the baby. It might cover the cost of your hospital bill, right? But we tend to frame this kind of family benefit either as though we have to make sure the parents really deserve it, have to justify why they're receiving it in some way, or we frame it as, well, we don't want to give people cash. We want to give them a voucher or a childcare slot. We want to get them back to work as quick as possible. And I think it's important to say that after a baby is born, parents do merit time with their child, right? Not just for physical healing, but very directly to be with their child. If we look at why the fertility rate is falling, it's a multi-factor thing, but one of it is there's huge opportunity cost to having a baby. And parents can struggle to capture a lot of the upside of having a baby if they're going straight back to work, not spending time with their children, rushing around between care and work. I want to make space for parents to really both heal and rejoice in a child, and a baby bonus is focused on that.
Yeah.
My longer term goal, we'll see, this is a more ambitious ask. Some countries offer caregiver credits as part of their pension or social security system. So in America, you get your social security determined by your prevailing wage at different points in your career, et cetera, et cetera. But if you take time out of the workforce to raise your kids or to care for a parent, all that time doesn't count for social security. Other countries like France say, yeah, that does count for a pension system. You are doing work, it's just unremunerative work. And you're doing work that sustains our entire social safety net in a different way. You can't have social security unless some people are having kids. So to some extent, you are paying into the system by raising the next generation of laborers. You're defraying the cost of someone who's elderly by caring for them. That's the very economics heavy way of framing it. But I think the natural way is just, this is something we're trying not to disincentivize. And when people are free to care for their family, that's a good thing. And we don't want them to be poor in retirement because they made this positive choice.
Yeah. Wow. So what can I do then? Do I reach out to my senators, my congresspeople? What do I do?
Well, you are very welcome to read my white paper on baby bonuses at the Niskanen Center, and by all means to call your rep or senator and talk to them about it. I think this is an idea that's picking up steam a little bit, just because it's a very concrete and doable and even affordable way for us to do one more right thing by families. There's a lot of problems that are harder to get traction on. I'm also working on childcare policy, and there I don't have really easy low-hanging fruit as of yet that makes stuff easier. But cushioning the income shock right after birth, I think, is a no-brainer for positive family policy.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, one question I love to ask writers, and you've talked about, you hope people will read it, set it down, talk about it, and then come back to it. But who is your book for, and who do you hope will read it, and what are your hopes for those who do read it?
I think the book is for everyone, but I think it's a really natural read for Christians who kind of feel torn between their care for the week and that it doesn't feel like you get to put all your different kinds of care for the week together into one package, right? How do I care for the poor, for people with disabilities, for the aging, but also care for the unborn? Is it allowed? People tell me I have to pick between which ones. And I'm hoping I'm giving you a pretty coherent sense of how these all fit together. And they fit together by taking need as natural, not by saying an unfair thing happens to women when she has a baby and the baby is essentially her enemy. I don't think it's a book that people who are pro-choice can't read. My hope is that they're reading it and going, wow, I agree with Leah on this point. I agree with Leah on this point. I don't want to be on Leah's side on this point, but she's really connecting these things I do care about with this thing I don't like so much. So why do I disagree with her? Why am I saying a baby is unlike an elderly person in this way, and that they get to kind of sit with that tension? And I'll say I had at least one early pro-choice reader who did connect with a lot of the book and hasn't changed her mind yet, but I think we had a better sense of how to talk to each other.
Wow. Are there things that you wish you'd put in the book? Or, well, I guess this kind of leads to what's next for you? What are you working on now?
Yeah, I don't have any huge long book form projects in the offing yet. I can tell you that one book I hope to write one day would be about how to have better arguments with people, real truth-seeking arguments where you both like each other better at the end of it while still being pretty upfront about your disagreements. I used to help run debates on college campuses, and that was a big part of my work. So I'd love to develop that in the long term. But in the short term, I am doing a lot of public policy work at work, and I'm doing a lot of reading kids' books at home. We've been reading the Edward Eager series of kids' books and Narnia. So that's what's up for me coming up.
Wow, that's fantastic. Well, Leah, this book is truly enjoyable. It's an invitation to reflect upon, what it does mean to be human, exactly as you've said. And so I know something I mentioned to you before we started recording. You do cite, Carter Snead, his book, What It Means to Be Human. But then, of course, you cite the great Alistair McIntyre, whom we miss already here at the DeNicola Center, and his book, particularly Dependent Rational Animals, which obviously is directly related to the theme of your book here, the fact that we are not alone. We are embedded in these networks already.
Absolutely. I love his writing, and I love his zeal for starting with what I think people find embarrassing about humans, about being human, and saying this is at the heart of what it means to be human. It's not just, humans luckily have other good qualities, and that cancels out our dependency, our animalness. Is like, it elevates parts of it. But, I think no Christian can ever think of dependency as something we outgrow, either as infants, right? And then we grow to be real people who embarrassingly started as babies, but thank goodness, now we're real and non-dependent, because a Christian knows that he or she is always moment to moment dependent on being conserved in existence by God. Yeah. And you can be an Olympic athlete, you can be a nomad living on a mountain completely by yourself, fishing, doing your own water, however off the grid you want to be. And there is no moment when you won't be first and foremost dependent, because you are dependent on God, first for your material existence and then for your salvation. And so luckily, we also have our minor dependencies on others to help us practice for the work of receiving God's enormous gift of love. We have our moments of dependency, both as children, on our parents, as friends, upon each other, as elderly people on those younger than us, to learn what it means to be cared for because we are needy in moments we cannot recompense the person who cares for us, and to see that as an act of love, not an act of, profound indulgence, not an act of cruelty to the person who's caring for us. And it's kind of by being catechized in all those little ways, we can think, what does it mean to accept the much greater gift of God's love?
Yeah. And imagine the great scandal that it is to believe in a God who was a baby who needed a diaper changed.
Yes, I love that. There's no part of our weakness that he finds unworthy of being divinized through him. Yeah.
The incarnation teaches us everything, right? Mm-hmm. Well, Leah, thank you so much for taking time to walk us through the ideas of your book, and excited that it's available now from University of Notre Dame Press in the series Catholic Ideas for a Secular World. So let's talk again soon.
My pleasure. I'd love that.
Thank you to Leah Sargeant. In the show notes, you will find links to her book, The Dignity of Dependence, a Feminist Manifesto, to her Substack, Other Feminisms, and to video of her panel presentation at our 2021 Fall Conference, I Have Called You by Name, Human Dignity in a Secular World. Subscribe to Ethics and Culture Cast so that you can always get the latest episodes by visiting ethicscenter.nd.edu/podcast. We would love your feedback. Please review the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and email your suggestions to cecpodcast@nd.edu. Our theme music is I Don't Know by Grapes, licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution License. We'll see you next time on Ethics and Culture Cast. Until then, make good decisions.